2.
Welcome to the Junto. This is the Benjamin Franklin live stream. We're going to be talking about the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. We are in episode 8, and hold on just one second. We're ready to start. We are working through this copy of the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. If you've got a different one, that's all right. It just, you might not know exactly where we're at, but we are going to be starting out in about page 73. And we stopped in our last episode basically at the end of when he's about 1730, sorry. So he's in his mid-20s, and he just kind of finished up talking about, you know, connecting with his wife and how he was going with business things. Oh, look out. And that's where it kind of stopped. And that's where the entire first phase of this document book kind of stopped. And there were some handwritten manuscripts was bouncing around many years later. And here is a letter that he got from Mr. Abel James. He received this letter while he was working in Paris as in a diplomatic function. And I'll read part of this. My dear and honorable friend, I've often been desirous of writing to thee, but could not be reconciled to the thought that the letter might fall into the hands of the British, lest some printer or busybody should publish some part of the contents and give our friend pain and myself censure. Sometime since there fell into my hands, to my great joy, about 23 sheets in thine own handwriting, containing an account of the parentage and life of thyself, directed to thy son, ending in the year 1730, with which there were notes likewise in thy writing, a copy of which I enclose in hopes it may be a means, if thou continued it up to a later period, that the first and the latter part might be put together, and if it is not yet continued, I hope thee will not delay it. My life is, or no, not my life, but life is uncertain, so true, as the preacher tells us, and what will the world say if kind, humane, and benevolent Benjamin Franklin should leave his friends and the world deprived of so pleasing and profitable a work which would be useful and entertaining not only to a few, but to millions. The influence writings under that class have on the minds of youth is very great, and has nowhere appeared to me so plain as in our public friends' journals. And he's talking about, it's sort of like the letter is to someone else about Benjamin Franklin and writing it. Then there's another letter that's connected to this letter, a letter by Mr. Benjamin Vaughan, and it's Paris, January 31st, 1783. My dearest, I'm going to skip forward. And read in here further. But these, sir, are small reasons, in my opinion. So he's trying to convince Benjamin Franklin to continue right. Compared with the chance which your life will give for the forming of future great men, and in conjunction with your art of virtue, which you designed to publish, of improving the features of public character, and consequently of aiding all happiness, both public and domestic. The two works I allude to, sir, will in particular give a noble rule and an example of self-education. School and other education constantly proceed upon false principles, and show a clumsy apparatus pointed to a false mark. But your apparatus is simple, and the mark a true one. And while parents and young persons are left destitute of other just means of estimating and becoming prepared for a reasonable course in life, your discovery that the thing is in many ways a man's private power, and it will be invaluable. Influence upon the private character late in life is not only an influence late in life, but a weak influence. It is the youth that we plant our chief habits. It is in youth that we plant our chief habits and prejudices. It is in youth that we take our party as to profession, pursuits, and matrimony. In youth, therefore, the turn is given. In youth, the education, even of the next generation, is given. In youth, the private and public character is determined, and the term of life extended. But from youth to age, life ought to begin well from youth, and more especially before we take our party as to our principal objects. But your biography will not merely teach self-education, but education of a wise man. And the wisest man will receive lights, that's sort of information or knowledge, and improve his progress by seeing detailed the conduct of other wise men or otherwise man. Ooh. Yeah, so a lot of people are seeing this, these small group of influential men, and they're saying, this seems to be the kind of education that a lot of people need. They're kind of maybe universalizing it to everyone. I'm not sure that that's the kind of education that everyone can handle, but the kind of self-education and the ideas that Benjamin Franklin, espouses here early on in his autobiography are ones that they think that a lot of people should take onto themselves. And of course, this totally true that if we have a really good start in life, life is so much easier. It's hard to get good habits when you're, 50, 60 years old. But if you get good habits when you're 15, then life is just going to be a whole lot easier. And it's, the letters kind of go on and on. It all hits the very kind of same thing over and over again, but, they're trying to convince him to keep writing his works. So I'm going to just skip through the rest of the letter, although they're worth reading. Because they're really, it's like, Benjamin Franklin, do this thing. You need to keep writing this. So he does. Continue writing. Now, let's see. I think the beginning section was when did he start it? 1770, like 7 or something like that. No, 1771. That's right. So here we are in 1784. So many years later, 13 years later, and he takes it back up again and starts writing. He doesn't have the old one at hand. He doesn't have his papers at hand, but he decides, I'm just going to do it. And here he is writing. It is some time since I received the above letters, but I've been too busy till now to think of complying with the request they contain. It might too be much better done if I were at home among my papers, which would aid my memory and help to ascertain dates, but my return being uncertain, and having just now a little leisure, I will endeavor to recollect and write what I can. If I live to get home, it may there be corrected and improved. And that's something to write, right there too, isn't it? It's like, if I lived long enough to, keep going, if I ever make it back to Pennsylvania, he wasn't so sure about that. Even though it was a safer, maybe he was thinking about his own health issues, maybe he was thinking about danger in traveling across the ocean, I don't know. Maybe it's both. So he's not sure where he ended, so he kind of backs up a little bit. And I think he's thinking about the time frame and what he'd written in the past some. And he goes back and he hits on the library yet again. Because I think probably even at this point, and again 13 years later, it's like, what's the real principal thing? What's the thing that happened about that time that was so important that I needed to go back and, hit it one more time? At the time I established myself in Pennsylvania, there was not a good bookseller's shop in any of the colonies to the southward of Boston. That's like all of the colonies. In New York and Philadelphia, the printers were indeed stationers. They sold only paper, etc., almanacs, ballads, and a few common school books. Those who loved reading were obliged to send for their books from England. The members of the junto were each a few. We had left the ale house where we had first met and hired a room to hold our club in. I proposed that we should all of us bring our books to that room where they would not only be ready to consult in our conferences, but to become a common benefit, each of us being at liberty to borrow such as he wished to read at home. This accordingly done, and for some time contented us. So there he goes back to that idea of, that first kernel seed of the library. How do we go beyond just one man's collection of books? What if we put, multiple people's collection of books together, and then we can, borrow and all that good stuff. And then he says, so few were the readers at the time in Philadelphia, and the majority of us so poor that I was not able with great industry to find more than 50 persons, mostly young tradesmen, willing to pay down for this purpose 40 shillings each and 10 shillings per annum on this little fund we began. The books were imported. The library was opened one day in the week for lending to the subscribers, on their promissory notes to pay double the value if not duly returned. The institution soon manifested its utility and was imitated by other towns and in other provinces. The libraries were augmented by donations, reading became fashionable, and our people, having no public amusements to divert their attention from study, became better acquainted with books, and in a few years were observed by strangers to be better instructed and more intelligent than people of the same rank generally are in other countries. And this kind of proves true to a certain extent. Something like, when you get to the Revolutionary War, you have Thomas Paine's Common Sense, and there were literally hundreds of thousands of copies printed and distributed of that, and there weren't that many people, in the colonies. So virtually everyone in the colonies had a copy go through their hands, and they were able to read it. That's kind of unprecedented. It's a very, very, by that time, literate. And here he is kind of placing a lot of that literary, prowess on the concept of starting this public library and it, kind of going, and immediately everybody's saying, that's a really good idea. Our community wants to do that too.
So can you remind me what it took to become a subscriber to the library?
Yeah, so the money part of it, right? So 40 shillings was the initial investment, and then 10 shillings per annum. Now, I don't know whether he's talking about Pennsylvania money here or shillings sterling, right? So that's so we already have to fudge around, but that's a pretty goodly sum if you say a tradesman's maybe going to get max, 15 shillings a week. So, it could easily be a month's wages to get into this. So it's pretty pricey.
And then somebody was asking, and you may not know this, but they're wondering if there were any women subscribers to libraries.
No clue. Right. It's a good question.
So to clean up on some questions real quick. Now, I will go ahead and tell everyone in the chat that there's not somebody on staff here that has kind of gone deep into Freemasonry, but that is, when you talk about Benjamin Franklin, a lot of people have questions about that. So do you know anything? Is there anything in this book about his involvement?
Not that I know of.
So, yeah, sorry, guys. I don't think that we have a whole lot of answers right there. And then another question that was interesting was, would the Townsends crew be interested in going to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia? They think that would be a neat trip.
I'd like to go all kinds of places. Let me tell you, I was just opening up a book on all these different kinds of mills in early America. I was like, I want to go there, and I want to go there, and I want to go there. So, yeah, I would love to go to the Franklin Institute.
Well, we see all you guys. I see Minneapolis in the Midwest here. A lot of people, I'm sure, in the U.S. We see Africa and Sweden. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, very good. I'll leave that for later. So we got into this library for 40 shillings and 10 shillings per annum. You gotta pay your money, and I love that. It's like if you borrow a book, you gotta pay, and if you don't bring it back, you lose it. Somebody steals it from you. You gotta pay double. We're gonna get more books in here. But yeah, people are donating at some point. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna donate my collection. We do see that, especially on people's passing, that they might sort of donate the whole collection to the library, and it's much used. So here he starts to talk about how this library affected him. This library afforded me the means of improvement by constant study, for which I set apart an hour or two each day, and thus repaired in some degree the loss of the learned education my father once intended for me. Reading was the only amusement I allowed myself. I spent no time in taverns, games, or frolics of any kind, and my industry and my business continued as indefatigable as it was necessary. I was indebted for my printing house. I had a young family coming on to be educated. I had to contend with, for business, 2 printers who were established in the place before me. My circumstances, however, grew daily easier. My original habits of frugality continued, my father having, among his instructions to me when a boy, frequently repeated a proverb of Solomon: "Seest thou a man diligent in his calling? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men." I from thence considered industry as a means of obtaining wealth and distinction, which encouraged me, though I did not think that I should ever literally stand before kings, which, however, has since happened, for I have stood before 5, and even had the honor of sitting down with one, the King of Denmark, to dinner. That is just like, it's like, huh? That's pretty cool. Yeah. It's like, that's a literal thing that's happening. So I loved that little section. He decided that, it's like, wait a minute, I have stood before kings. Not many of us can say that.
No, it's interesting. I always like reading the sections of autobiographies from Americans who met a number of presidents, and just talk about the differences and how it's this same title, but everybody has the thing that they bring to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said 5 kings?
5.
Yeah.
5. He then goes into this section where he's talking a little bit about, and again, he's kind of, because this is a second section and he doesn't have that first one, he's backing up a little bit and he's pointing out kind of, important spots. He hits this idea of, he says, I was religiously educated as a Presbyterian, and, then he's already talked about, some of his, it's like, well, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that. But he says, we skip ahead. He says, though I seldom attended any public worship, I still had an opinion of its propriety and its utility when rightly conducted, and I regularly paid my annual subscription for the support of the only Presbyterian minister or meeting we had in Philadelphia. And then we skip down a little bit. At length, this minister here, at length he took for his text the verse for the 4th chapter of Philippians. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, honest, pure, just, pure, lovely, and of good report, if there be any virtue or any praise, think on these things. And I imagined in a sermon on such a text that we could not miss of having some morality. But he confined himself to 5 points only, as meant by the apostle, vis-a-vis keeping the holy Sabbath, let's see, let me read it properly here. Keeping holy the Sabbath day, being diligent in reading the Holy Scriptures, attending duly the public worship, partaking of the sacrament, and number 5, paying a due respect to God's ministers. These might be all good things, but as they were not the kind of good things I expected from the text, I despaired of ever meeting with them from any other, and was disgusted and attended his preaching no more. I had some years before composed a little liturgy, or a form of prayer, for my own public use. This was 1728, and it's entitled The Articles of Belief and Acts of Religion. I returned to the use of this and went no more to public assemblies. My conduct might be blamable, but I leave it without attempting further to excuse it. My present purpose being to relate facts and not to make apologies for them. It was about this time I received the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. And I'm going to make this episode a little shorter because that is the next section. And we're going to, I want to dig deep, and we'll probably do a shorter number of pages and kind of concentrate on his idea of virtues, what he's doing with them, how he works with them, kind of a chart, and re-looking at them at times. I think that's a really important part of what he's doing here. It's interesting that he's seeing at least a lack of what's the outworking of the religious ideas, and he's seeing all of these. He can see all of these sort of played out in front of him. He's growing up in Presbyterianism and in a Boston area, and he's been to New York where there's different kind of religious ideas. And then he's definitely in Philadelphia, and that's completely different. And the Quakerism that's going there, the Quaker belief set's very, very different in a lot of different kind of ways, and it's got outworkings. Each one of these have sort of like a religious core concepts, and then the outworkings of them. And those outworkings point to whether or not those things are true, or where the emphasis is played at, right? So I think that's an important thing. And he says, I think these, I want to have a good life. So he's kind of working backwards instead of going from these core concepts and having it work out. He's like, well, I want to have this good working out. Let's dig down and kind of put in place the core concepts. I don't know how that really works out, and how that necessarily totally worked out for Benjamin Franklin sometimes, but I think it's definitely worth digging in hard on what he thinks about those, because I think it points to what people were thinking in the time, or maybe what people weren't thinking, and he said, it's like, well, they should be thinking about these things.
Dave Stelling comments, Franklin's endeavors towards self-improvement are admirable.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, he's certainly, he wasn't a hedonist, he wasn't just like, whoopee, I want to, at least early on. He wanted to, and I think definitely you could see the impact, as even the letters are pointing out, the impact that his father and family had on what he thought was right and proper for, continuing what he should grow up to be like.
So non-applicable is in Super Chat. It says, pretty exciting life for a farm boy from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if he's a farm boy, but how about this? For a candle maker, grew up to be a candle maker or whatever. I don't know if there were so much, farmers, but they were definitely not, on a social level, yeah, farmer.
Sure, yeah, right. And then I don't know if you've got any answers for this, but Spinning of the Past put a great question earlier, and it's a three-part question, actually. Has there been any list compiled of the books that were in the library?
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's certainly allusions to a lot of the different books that he would have had, different pamphlets that he wrote that point you to things he was reading. So that you knew it's like, oh, well, this is a reaction to this book or that book. So we definitely have some clues about the kinds of things that they were reading and what he had, access to. Things like the proceedings of, the scientific societies in Great Britain. So he was reacting to a lot of scientific thought of the time period and just straight up, moral philosophy and philosophy of the time period. So I think we could probably reconstruct at least half of what was in his library just by digging into those.
Spinning the Past also was wondering how they voted to choose titles that were brought in, which I don't see how we would know that, but it's a great question.
Right.
And then they said, other than pain, what topics were of interest?
Other than pain?
Yes. Like Payne.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry. I was
Right.
Well, pleasure, pain. Yeah, so there was if we go digging in the things that we have available to us today, so we can go into archive.org or some other libraries that have a lot of books written in the late 17th century and all through the 18th century. It's very interesting what's there and what isn't there. So there's a lot of religious texts, there's a lot of thought going into that in the time period, even though it's kind of a cool, if you say, for religious thought, it's not, a lot of excitement in the 18th century. There's the First Great Awakening, but it's really not, it's a reaction to a very cool time for that. But we see a lot of, scientific thought that's coming forward. We see, if we looked at it today, if we had a chart of topics that people were excited about and buying books about, compared to the chart that would be for the 18th century, it would be just so utterly, different that it's kind of mind-blowing. Things like, how much fiction is bought today versus as a percentage, how much fiction was produced and bought in the 18th century.
So I really like this comment. It says, I hope people realize there are hundreds of historians in the world who have qualified answers to all of these questions. I love Townsends, but if you want historical knowledge, it's there to be found.
It is. There's a amazing number of books that are written every day about different topics, and we just have to go digging for them. And even going back and looking at some of these things 100 years ago that were written, or 200 years ago, it's like even the historic knowledge that we've got is all based on layers and layers of other historic knowledge. Things change, people come up with different ideas, and in 100 years somebody else is going to have a different idea about what was important about
Well, and so much of what is on our channel is governed by what we're interested at the time that we're making those videos.
Exactly. And I cannot be an expert on basically anything because I'm, kind of looking at so many different things. It's really hard to dig in and it's like, well, why don't you know, what Benjamin Franklin's library was like? We're like, well, because I'm looking at mills in the book today, or looking at shoes. Or
those people are people that dedicate
Exactly.
time frames to Benjamin Franklin.
Right, and they're spending a life, studying the work of one man, which is a good thing.
So what we hope is that when we bring up topics on the channel that inspire you and that you wonder about, you will go kind of further that research yourselves.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Right. And just because I'm interested in something doesn't make it a good video, because if John can't talk about it, then there's not a video.
Right. And we also love to find people that have dug into those things and are the expert and bring them onto the channel. Mm-hmm. Those are the days I live for.
Okay. I don't see a whole lot of questions right now.
Okay, really good. I think we will. I'll spend some time, and we'll dig deep on his virtue thing. Heck, we might even come up with our own little virtue document. We can all work on our virtues together.
Wow.
Just like Benjamin Franklin. Oh, I'm going to check off this virtue today. Tomorrow I'll be working on a different one.
Right. So I do want to say off topic real quick that if you guys follow the Townsends Highlights channel, which I'm not sure if you do, and if you don't, you should look it up and subscribe. But we are doing a live stream on the Townsends Highlights channel tomorrow.
Are we?
Yeah, you don't know about this. Sorry. So John won't be a part of that one. It's the video production team, and they're going to go into some of the technical aspects of how we make videos, and we're going to kind of dissect a little bit of what ideas turn into videos. So.
Maybe I could be on the console.
Yeah. I figured you had more important things to do.
Well, I am a little busy right now. But yeah, I can't wait to see that, and that's a lot of fun. I just saw that you guys put a highlight of that live stream that you and Aaron did on Townsend's Highlights. So.
Well, I found out about that one after it happened, too.
So it's fun to see. We're working on a lot of different projects, and I'm super excited about what's going to come up next, because just like that, it's like even I don't know what's going to happen next year sometimes, even though somebody else has planned it.
So spinning of the past, as I remember writing out that virtue document long ago, very impressive.
Yeah.
It could be fun.
Yeah, it's I think it's a good exercise for most people. It's good to kind of also have the foundation of, okay, why, right? It's like, why do I want to have these virtues? How do I know that they're good or bad? But, on top of that, the virtues themselves, really good.
So this is in all caps. Where do I find the old books?
Where do you find the old books? Okay. There probably needs to be a whole kind of in-depth thing, and I wanted to do this a lot more on Townsends Plus sometime soon, kind of a whole series of what John's digging in today and how he found it. But most of the research that I do, I kind of do a interesting, I call it sort of like fishing, fishing for information, right? It's like, what's the neat thing I'm going to find today? And I always, I tend to do my fishing currently in archive.org. So archive.org, it has, you might have seen it, but the Wayback Machine is there, where if you want to see a website and what it looked like, 10 years ago, you can find that. But archive.org has all kinds of, audio recordings and movies and things. They're all public domain sort of items, but they have a huge quantity of books, anything written. You can find things from the 16th century, the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, whatever. In fact, you can borrow books today from the library. You can just sort of like, I want to borrow this digital version of a book for an hour. Yeah. And then you can borrow it, and then it kind of goes back, right? However that works out. But they have a search engine. It's tricky and not always the easiest thing to use, but you can search for topics, authors, and then you can constrain the timeline. So it's like, I just want to look for books that have the word, corn in the title from 1771. And yeah, you can run that search and see what you find. And sometimes I'll just look through years. I'll just say, what are all the books from 1769? And they're all there, and then I'll look through 100 of them, and I might find one that I'm interested in. But generally, they lead me to keep going down particular rabbit trails, and I'm generally working on, 5 or 10 topics at a time in my head, and so I'll be looking for any one of those, like, that one's interesting, and I'll just favorite it and move on. And then some other day, I'll just look through my recent favorites and do deeper research on a book like that. So archive.org, you can also do a lot of that kind of work on books.google.com. Similar experience, different in some ways better, some ways worse.
I think the years, looking through by years, it also really helps if you're trying to understand a specific topic. Like when I used to go through and look for a lot of cocktails from the time period, if you go backwards by years and you're like, I can find a lot of information on this drink here, but I can't find anything before that, you can almost see where it changed its name or where it came into fashion and what it derived from. So that's a good trick there.
It sort of disappears as you go back, and it's like, okay, what name was it? How do I find it? It's really, really, it's kind of deep work. And sometimes, unless you have something you're really looking for, it's like, okay, this is boring.
All right. I think that catches us
We
up
did
here.
it. Yeah. So we will be getting into the virtues, and that's about page 86 in this episode. It's interesting how he mentions those virtues in that first section, but he doesn't really get around until printing them out. And really, he realizes at this point, everybody's saying, this is an important thing, Benjamin Franklin. You really need to kind of publish this thing maybe as a whole book on its own. So we will dig into virtues. We'll get virtuous next week here in the Nutmeg Tavern. We are going to be doing a Nutmeg Tavern live stream on Friday. Of course, there's tomorrow's live stream. I don't know, on Townsend's highlights. Yeah. There's going to be a regular Nutmeg Tavern live stream on Friday. Not sure which topic we're going to pick on that.
We're going to surprise them.
I got to do some little arm wrestling so we can decide on that. And lots more videos coming out. So thank you for being part of what we do here on the Townsends channel. You guys help make all these things happen, or else I would just be, sitting at home and on my couch reading these things and not talking about it. But you're there, you want to hear it, so we're doing it. Thank you, Ryan. We'll see you folks later. Have a great evening. Thanks for watching.